Did you know that most engine wear actually happens in the first few seconds after a cold start? Habits that seem harmless when starting a cold engine, like letting the car idle too long, driving only short distances, or flooring the gas too quickly, can actually shorten your engine's lifespan by 15,000 to 25,000 miles in just a few years of use. In this video, we'll go over the 5 most dangerous mistakes when cold starting that every driver should avoid to protect the heart of your car right from the very first seconds. But first, let's understand why a cold start is so important. Technically speaking, a cold start not only helps the engine reach operating temperature, but also warms up the oil inside. Oil is a vital lifeblood of the engine, responsible for lubricating all moving parts so they can run smoothly and efficiently. When the engine hasn't been used for a long period, say, from when you park your car overnight to when you start it in the morning, most of the oil settles at the bottom of the engine. While there is still some residual oil on the upper parts, it isn't enough to provide full protection, especially if you push the engine hard right from the start. This is why it's important to give the engine a few seconds to circulate and warm the oil before driving aggressively. The ability of the oil to warm up and flow depends on its viscosity, its capacity to flow easily at a certain temperature. When the engine is cold, the oil is thicker, flows more slowly, and can't form a thin protective layer for moving parts. Starting and warming up the engine gives the oil time to reach the proper temperature, flow more effectively, and ensure the metal surfaces are protected from the very first seconds. It's such an important step, yet many people still get it wrong, unknowingly causing engine wear. Let's go through the 5 most common mistakes below and see if you're making any of them. Let's be honest. Do you have the habit of giving the car a little rev right after starting, just to feel like the engine warms up faster? Trust us, you might want to quit this habit after watching this video. The engine is not a superpower. It's designed to perform best at operating temperature, usually around 185 to 121 degrees Celsius, or 80–105 degrees Celsius for non-Americans out there. When you start the car in the morning or after it has been parked for a few hours, all the metal parts inside are still hibernating at room temperature, contracted and totally unprepared for the friction you're about to throw at them. Pistons, cylinder walls, piston rings, crankshaft bearings, camshaft, and rocker arms all are in their most sensitive state. So what happens when you hit the gas immediately? The RPM jumps while the metal parts are still cold and contracted. Pistons start moving faster but haven't expanded to the correct size, creating large gaps. Inertia suddenly turns the piston into a bouncing tennis ball in the cylinder and the lubricating oil. It hasn't formed a proper layer yet, still thick due to low temperature, and hasn't fully circulated to the top end. The result? Metal-on-metal friction for several crucial seconds. Do you know what that first clack or knock you hear on a cold start is? That's a piston slap. Literally, metal hitting metal. Each time this happens, cylinder walls get scratched, piston rings wear down, compression drops, and oil consumption increases. Your car starts burning more oil, fuel economy drops, power decreases, and those seemingly harmless quick revs now become the reason you might need a $3,000–, $5,000 engine repair after a few years. What should you do instead? Simply wait 30 to 60 seconds after starting. During this time, oil circulates through all critical friction surfaces, begins to thin under heat, and metal parts expand slightly. That's enough for the engine to go from dry, cold, thick oil to stable, lubricated, fully ready for gentle revs. Remember, after starting, don't hit the gas. No revving, no sudden acceleration. When you start driving, keep RPM below 2,000, 2,500, avoid steep inclines and heavy loads. Only accelerate normally when the temperature gauge reaches operating level, the engine runs smoothly, and the knocks have disappeared. Simple enough, right? Many people still have the habit of letting the car idle 5 to 10 minutes to warm up the engine. This seems like common advice from older drivers, but it's only true for vintage carbureted cars, where the carburetor needed time to mix the fuel properly. For modern cars with electronic fuel injection and ECU, it actually just wastes gas, harms the engine, and even pollutes the environment. When you start your car in the morning or after a few hours of inactivity, the engine temperature is low. The ECU switches to a rich mixture to ensure easy starting and stable RPM. Cold oil is thicker, circulation to friction surfaces takes time, and basically everything is waiting for heat to operate normally. Ideally, the engine should reach operating temperature quickly to protect critical components and operate efficiently. So why is long idling not only useless but harmful? First, prolonged rich fuel causes fuel dilution. Gasoline seeps into the oil, thinning it, reducing anti-wear capability and accelerating oil degradation. Second, idling generates very little heat. The low RPM produces minimal thermal energy, and it can take 10–20 minutes for the engine to reach operating temperature. Compared to gentle driving, the heat generated while moving warms up the engine 2 to 3 times faster. Third, long idling leads to moisture and carbon buildup. Water in the combustion chamber doesn't fully evaporate. Soot sticks to spark plugs, intake, and injectors, reducing combustion efficiency and prolonging wear. Long-term consequences? Thinned oil, camshaft, piston rings, cylinder walls, and crankshaft bearings wear faster. Wasted fuel. Engine ages faster, requiring more frequent maintenance. For turbo engines, thin oil reduces turbo lubrication, easily damaging blades and the shaft. If you live in the US, remember that excessive idling also increases CO and HC emissions, and some states or cities fine drivers who idle for more than a few minutes. What's the correct approach? After starting, just 30 to 60 seconds of idling, enough for oil to circulate through critical surfaces and reduce initial thickness. Then start driving gently. Keep RPM below 2,000–2,500. Avoid hard acceleration or high speeds while the engine is cold. Only operate normally when the coolant temperature gauge reaches the mid-range. At this point, oil has thinned to the right level, metal has expanded to proper dimensions, and the engine is ready for any challenge. Of course, there are exceptions. In extremely cold regions or with heavy trucks, older diesel engines might need 1 to 2 more minutes of idling. But if you drive a modern gasoline car, long idling doesn't help. It only wastes gas, harms oil, and accelerates engine wear. Remember, the habit of idling too long doesn't warm the engine faster. It prolongs harmful conditions. Instead, idle 30 to 60 seconds, drive gently, and let the engine warm up properly, saving fuel and extending the life of your car's most important companion. In cold weather, engine oil is already thicker and flows more slowly, making it harder to reach piston ring grooves, piston oil holes, camshaft edges, or crankshaft bearings. The result is a rough, heavy-feeling engine where the initial lubrication hasn't fully formed. If you also use oil with the wrong SAE rating, things get even worse. Oil that is too thick, like 20W50 in cold regions, forces the oil pump to work harder, delays the oil film reaching critical surfaces, and causes friction to spike in the first 5 to 15 seconds. Turbo engines are even worse. The turbo shaft and blades lack lubrication, wear quickly, or even seize after just a few wrong starts. On the other hand, if the oil is too thin, like an SAE too low for hot regions, the oil flows fast, but the protective film is weak, oil pressure drops, camshafts and bearings wear faster, and pistons and cylinders can no longer seal properly, reducing engine power. Not to mention if the oil doesn't meet API or ACEA standards, anti-wear and anti-oxidation additives are less effective, increasing the risk of deposits, especially in cold weather. Cold weather just makes everything worse. Thicker oil, contracted metal, larger clearances, low oil pressure, and every metal part thirsting for oil as soon as the engine starts. The oil film forms late, friction spikes, and wear occurs in the very first seconds without you even noticing. Over time, the long-term consequences are clear. Piston rings wear, compression drops, oil consumption increases, cylinders wear, power drops, camshaft and rocker arms suffer. Fuel consumption rises due to high friction. Oil degrades faster, requiring earlier changes. And the risk of engine seizure is always present if you're careless. Our advice? Choose the correct SAE grade according to the manufacturer's manual. Prioritize 0W or 5W oil for cold seasons, and strictly follow API ICE ACEA standards suitable for your car. Full synthetic oil is preferred as it flows faster, maintains stable viscosity, and protects critical components from the very first seconds. When should you switch to a lower W-grade oil? Winter, cars parked outside overnight in the cold, rough engine start noises, many short trips, or turbo engines. There's really no reason to risk it. Have you ever driven just a few hundred meters, then returned home and didn't use the car for the rest of the day? It seems harmless, but these short trips can slowly wear out your engine. You may not hear anything, but inside, the oil and coolant struggle to reach the optimal operating temperature that the manufacturer designed. When the engine is cold, oil is thicker, can't fully lubricate all parts, and the catalytic converter isn't hot enough to burn fuel completely. The result? Even if the car travels only 1 or 2 miles, the oil isn't warm enough to protect, and leftover fuel begins to seep into the oil. That's not all. Every time the engine cools, natural moisture in the intake condenses inside the engine. If you only drive short distances, this moisture doesn't evaporate, and combined with unburned fuel in the oil, it thins the oil and reduces lubrication. Moisture also reacts with oil additives to form mild acids, silently corroding metal. The result? Faster oil aging, reduced engine life, and all critical steel parts like piston rings, camshafts, and crankshaft bearings experience higher friction. The ECU continuously enriches the fuel mixture to keep RPM stable, and the catalytic converter endures stress from repeated exposure to unburned fuel. Altogether, your car ages quickly, even if the daily mileage is just a few kilometers. Worse, the habit of repeated cold starts multiplies the problem. Every start subjects the engine to tens of seconds where oil hasn't fully lubricated, and if repeated multiple times a day, that's thousands of kilometers of accumulated wear you don't notice. Many manufacturers have even noted that wear in the first 30 seconds of a cold start is many times higher than when the engine is warm, making short trips extremely harmful. Advice for those who cannot avoid short trips: minimize the number of cold starts. If necessary, combine errands into a longer trip to reduce starts. For cars driven mainly on short trips, change the oil sooner than recommended. Monitor oil condition with the dipstick for discoloration or thinning. And if possible, keep the car in a garage or warm place during cold months to reduce cold start stress. These small changes can make a big difference, helping your engine last longer and avoiding costly repairs that could have been prevented. Imagine you just press the start button and the engine begins to groan under the hood. But don't assume that noise means everything is safe. Inside, the metal components, camshaft, crankshaft, piston rings, bearings, are under extreme stress and not yet fully lubricated. The oil hasn't spread across all surfaces, the protective film is still fragile, and even a single rushed acceleration or high RPM can put the entire engine into a dangerous zone within the first few seconds. The correct starting procedure isn't just a formality, it's about protecting the very heart of your car. Waiting 30 to 60 seconds after ignition isn't a waste of time. This is the period during which oil circulates to critical parts, oil pressure stabilizes, and initial friction is minimized. If you rush, idling too long causes a different problem. The fuel mixture becomes overly rich. Gasoline can seep into the oil, thinning it and accelerating wear. When you start moving, it's important to drive gently. Keeping RPMs under 2,000–2,500 isn't slow. It allows oil to continue circulating through components while the engine isn't yet ready to handle load. The oil hasn't reached optimal temperature, and the ECU is still adjusting the mixture to maintain idle. Accelerating too early at this stage means higher fuel consumption, more deposits, and shorter spark plug life. The catalytic converter also isn't hot enough yet, so heavy acceleration will create excess fuel, reducing converter lifespan and combustion efficiency. Only when the temperature gauge reaches operating level, meaning the oil is sufficiently warm and pistons and rings have expanded to the right size, are you truly safe to accelerate. At this point, the oil fully lubricates, moving parts are stable, and the ECU has adjusted the fuel mixture. Skipping this step is equivalent to forcing the engine to operate with poor lubrication, causing premature wear from the very first minute. For turbocharged engines, the situation is even more critical. The turbocharger spins at extremely high speeds and relies entirely on oil for lubrication and cooling. If the oil hasn't circulated properly, boosting too early will quickly wear the turbo bearings and may even seize the shaft. The solution is to wait a bit longer, about 60–90 seconds, and drive lightly for the first few minutes before increasing boost. Rushing at this point will be costly. Remember, in the world of modern engines, haste is the #1 enemy. A minute of patience in the first seconds isn't wasted. It's long-term insurance for the heart of your car. The moment you stomp on the gas, the pistons, piston rings, camshaft, and bearings are subjected to maximum friction while the oil is still lazy about circulating. Metal is rubbing directly against metal, and that clack or knock you hear? That's piston slap, a kind of metal hitting metal that your engine will remember for a long time. It's a warning sound that every time you try to burn some morning adrenaline, your engine is paying the price in a way that will show up as a repair bill of a few $1,000s in a few years. Cylinder walls get scratched, piston rings wear out, compression drops, oil consumption rises, fuel efficiency drops, and if it's a turbo engine, sensitive components are silently crying even more. Situations like hitting a steep incline right after starting, hauling heavy loads or towing a trailer in the first few minutes, or multiple cold starts in a day while driving aggressively, all of these may feel like just a little morning adrenaline, but in reality, each one is a small blow that accumulates into major damage. In short, if your early morning drive looks like a drag race, your engine is quietly drafting a lawsuit against you. Now, imagine a different scenario. You treat your car a little more politely. Keep the RPM below 2,000–2,500. Accelerate gently and let the engine gradually get to work. It may sound boring, but this is exactly how you make your engine last longer without spending thousands on repairs. Driving gently allows the oil to circulate to all the critical components, forming a perfect protective layer. Pistons and cylinder walls expand gradually. Gaps don't become excessive, reducing initial friction and preventing early wear. The ECU can adjust the fuel mixture more easily, cutting fuel consumption and carbon buildup, meaning you're protecting your engine while saving gas. Here are some practical tips. Start moving slowly, maintain a low speed for the first few minutes, avoid steep hills and heavy loads while the engine is still cold, and if possible, combine short trips to reduce the number of cold starts per day. Think of it like preparing for a marathon. You wouldn't sprint straight into the race without warming up properly, right? The engine is the same. Give it time to stretch, pump oil, and warm up before you start going all out. Doing this not only helps your engine live longer, but also saves gas, reduces the risk of breakdowns, and most importantly, spares you from crying over painful repair bills. As you can see, seemingly small mistakes when starting and operating a cold engine, idling too long, using the wrong oil viscosity, taking short trips, or starting and driving incorrectly, if repeated daily, accumulate into serious consequences. A few correct habits from the very first seconds, letting oil circulate, driving gently, and only accelerating when the engine is ready, can extend your car's lifespan by tens of thousands of miles. Have you ever made any of these mistakes? Or have you ever heard of the tips we mentioned above? Share your story in the comments below. Lastly, notice that the content in this video is based on publicly available information, vehicle manuals, and automotive studies. It is intended for educational and informational purposes only, not to promote any specific brand or product. Viewers should always cross-check information, follow manufacturer recommendations, and make their own informed decisions when it comes to vehicle maintenance. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.